Hello, BookTube. We're going to do a mail haul on this channel like we just don't care. I'm not going to vet these books ahead of time. I'm not going to open these packages off camera. We're going to open some packages on camera and hope for the best. I will try to control myself. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so controlling myself may be easier than normal. It's a beautiful, bright, sunny day, perfect for walking around. I wish that I felt more like doing it, but fortunately I have a very indoor dog. Frida loves to go out and strut around the neighborhood and bustle and see people and order them to pet her, but she's perfectly happy to spend large amounts of time indoors, more so than any dog I've ever had. Still, we'll try and get some fresh air, but it's also a historic day here in America. Today, the former president of the United States was indicted in Manhattan on 34 felony counts. So not what a lot of prognosticators were thinking ahead of time, which is that the bill of indictment, when it was unsealed and read, would contain a couple of felonies and a whole bunch of misdemeanors, but rather 34 felonies. A hardball. Not a small thing, not something that can be written off. But unfortunately, thanks to Manhattan, something that can be delayed until we're all old and gray. So I expect to see that happening, but I wonder now, since the dam has broken, I wonder if I was being overly pessimistic. I wonder if the rule of law in the United States is maybe a tiny bit healthier than I thought it was. In other words, I wonder if this same person will be indicted on other charges in other jurisdictions. As has often been said by news commentators in America in this last week, the charges in the Manhattan's case are weak. They're not, there's no such thing as an inconsequential felony, but nevertheless, they aren't anywhere near as bad as the illegalities that were committed by this person. For instance, the case in Fulton County, Georgia, is about him directly trying to invalidate a U.S. election. That is an immeasurably worse crime than the crimes for which he has been indicted in Manhattan. And there's a federal case about his planning, plotting, orchestrating, and inciting and wanting to lead in person a violent insurrection to overthrow the government. There isn't any crime that a president could commit that's worse than that. Is it possible that this is the first of many indictments? It's weird. It's a weird feeling day for me. So, I mean, I was hoping for a few fugitive weeks, long before most of you were born, I was hoping that Richard Nixon would be indicted. And then, decades after that, I was hoping and kind of on one level expecting that George W. Bush would be indicted. And nothing like it happened. In both cases, they were pardoned. In both cases, the signal was made by their successor, I'm not even going to consider holding you criminally accountable for your obviously, patently criminal acts. I'm not even going to consider doing it. I kind of, given those two huge disappointments, I kind of thought that this would just keep happening, and I'm a little bit dazed and also a little bit surprised. I actually thought that if that pattern ever was broken, I would feel happy, and I don't. I very much don't. So it's a historic day. It's a beautiful day, weather-wise, and of course I've got the bean with me and a ton of work to do later today. I don't know how I'm going to do it, feeling the way I do, but my imaginary BookTube friends come first. So I thought we'd go through the mail. We're going to go through the mail. We're going to open it without knowing anything about what we're getting, and we're just going to make it work. So we're going to make it work. So what is the first package that we're going to make work? We're going to make this work. Okay, this is a novel from the folks at Melville House. This comes out on May the 3rd. I have to hold this up on the other side so that it doesn't block the bean. This is by Steve Toltz, and it is called Here Goes Nothing. Yet another very nice American cover. No idea what's going on there. What is this? So this is a novel. Angus Mooney has never believed in the supernatural. A reformed ne'er-do-well who was raised in a series of foster homes, he's always felt that, quote, people on earth are self-mythologizing liars who only have premonitions in hindsight. But after his untimely murder, he's shocked to find himself in the afterlife, or what he assumes is the afterlife. His designated clerk can't give him a straight answer, and the orientation sessions are all full. Now all Angus wants is to communicate from beyond with his pregnant wife Gracie, an unconventional wedding officiant who finally made his life worth living. But when Angus finds a way to see how Gracie is faring, the news is grim. His own murderer is slowly seducing her, and a worldwide pandemic has finally reached the shores of Australia, which means the afterlife is about to get much more bizarre and much more crowded. And much more crowded. Okay, great. All right, so this author has been previously nominated for the Booker, and he was born in Sydney, Australia, and he currently lives in LA. And this comes out on May the 3rd. So not far off, one day early for Star Wars Day. Okay, so a novel about, I wonder if that description doesn't mean that maybe this is a COVID-19 book. And not necessarily that is the pandemic, but that was when the book was written. I'm kind of keeping informal track of all of that as things go. All right, so let's look at this next one. We're just going to do a mail haul. I'm not going to care at all. I've done a couple of videos in the last few months, this year and late last year, about the minefield that mail hauls have become and how I was starting to vet the books off camera, and that I'd often caught myself doing 40-minute rants on camera and had to just delete the video. I had a number of you reach out to me, more on that subject than any other, sending me emails. I leave my email on every video. Feel free to email me about anything. It doesn't have to be about what I rant about on a video. It can be about anything. But I've had a number of people email saying, please just don't care about that. We already know that we don't always agree with you. Those of us who watch your channel don't always agree with you, but you shouldn't be censoring yourself. That just gives the wrong people encouragement, which I thought was, that is interesting to say, but it's the threat of the negative consequences of speaking my mind on some of the things that some books have made me do is real. That threat is real. But we're not going to care about that in this video. We're just going to move forward. Oh, wow. Okay. So this is Tor. Fantastic. Tor is sending me things. That is great. And this is a known quantity, although not this book. This comes out on the 1st of August. And this is Jacqueline Carey's book, Cassandras Servant. Look at that. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so what have we got here? There are a few stories that hold such an important place in fantasy canon as award-winning author Jacqueline Carey's Kushiel Legacy series. It centers on Phaedra, a daring courtesan trained in espionage who uncovers a plot to destroy her homeland amidst many tangled political and emotional webs. But hers is only half the story, which is why I am absolutely beside myself into sending you an advance copy of Cassandras Servant, which is a retelling of cult favorite Kushiel's Dart, which is where this all started, was Kushiel's Dart, from the point of view of Jocelyn, Castelline warrior priest and protector of Phaedra. He's sworn to celibacy and the blade as surely as she's pledged to pleasure. But the gods they serve have bound them together. When both are betrayed, they must rely on each other to survive. So this is something that authors almost never do, and I wish a lot of them did, which is to go back and tell the same story from some other character's point of view. The only way that you could really get away with it definitely applies to Jacqueline Carey, is it's just the original story has to be incredibly popular. So we have a quote from the author. Why tell this story now? She's asked. And she says, I never meant to write Cassandras Servant, and then I wrote a poem. It was a commission for a benefit. I pledged an Elizabethan sonnet and polled readers. Overwhelmingly, fans wanted a love poem from Jocelyn, my stoic warrior priest, to Phaedra. For the first time, Jocelyn spoke. Not just lines of dialogue, he opened up his inner narrative. Fantastic. Just fantastic. So this comes out in early August. Probably I will wait. Probably in mid or late July, I will get a finished copy of this from Tor, and that will be the kick I need to start reading it. And probably in the meantime, almost certainly in the meantime, the gods, the serendipity gods of the book world must provide me with a copy of Kushiel's Dart, which I haven't read since it first came out, which is a long time ago. That is, 30 years since Kushiel's Dart came out. I certainly need to reread that before I reread this book. It won't be hard to do. I'm sure that I probably have an ebook of it. But if I don't, it will show up at the Brattle Bookshop. So then we have two boxes. They aren't big. They aren't going to be huge doorstop books, but I like boxes anyway. They're usually the token finished copies. So let's see what this first one is. I'll bring it over here so we don't block the beam. Oh, and there's an invoice. That's gross. I don't want that. I don't want an invoice. Let's get you out of here. Oh, great. Okay, we saw this already. The invoice is the only paperwork that came in here, not an actual pub sheet, but that's all right. We'll just read from the dust jacket as if you saw this in a bookstore. This is Beth Bailey, her book, An Army of Fire, with the subtitle, How the U.S. Army Confronted Its Racial Crisis in the Vietnam Era. Let's see here. The only thing wrong with not having a pub sheet is that I don't know when this comes out, but I'm pretty sure this is a May release. By the late 1960s, what had been widely heralded as the best qualified, best trained army in U.S. history was descending into the crisis as the Vietnam War raged without end. Morale was tanking, AWOL, that's absent without leave, rates were rising, and in August of 1968, a group of black soldiers seized control of the infamous Long Binh jail, burned buildings, and beat a white inmate to death with a shovel. The days of, quote, same mud, same blood were over, and a new generation of black GIs had decisively rejected the slights and institutional racism their forefathers had endured. And just parenthetically here, I won't try to get into trouble with this book, they had decisively rejected the slights and institutional racism their forefathers had endured, and they had also murdered someone who was innocent because of his skin color. Just according to the description that we've already been given in this book. As black and white soldiers fought in barracks and bars, with violence spilling into surrounding towns in the United States and West Germany, Vietnam, South Korea, and Japan, Army leaders grew convinced that the growing racial crisis undermined the Army's ability to defend the nation. Acclaimed military historian Beth Bailey shows how the U.S. Army tried to solve that racial crisis. Army leaders were surprisingly creative in confronting demands for racial justice, even willing to challenge fundamental Army principles of discipline, order, hierarchy, and authority. Bailey traces a frustrating yet fascinating story as a massive conservative institution came to terms with demands for change, and also with a lynching, which is described in the first paragraph of this cover sheet, of this dust jacket copy. What's described in the first paragraph of here is black soldiers lynching a white man. I would imagine in the course of this book that the Army has to come to terms with that too. Okay, because that is wrong. That is murder. That is racism. So we will see. I have quite a few racial retellings, relooking, resiftings of the historical record in this year so far. I imagine that's a trend that's only going to get stronger as the year goes on. But I'm glad to have a finished copy of this because it is a kick in the pants. I will put this closer to the top of my reading list and see what the author has to say. Baby, stop your licking, baby. She just gets into this zone where she just keeps licking. In case you're worried, some of you sometimes see that and you're worried that she's in pain or has a burr or a cut or something. She doesn't. I've checked this many, many times. She just sometimes gets into that zone and needs to be brought out of it again so that she doesn't get a hairball or something like that. But anyway, let's do this next book. Another box, and then we'll be done. We'll have gotten through a mail haul like we just don't care. So what is this next one? Another finished copy. Oh, great. Okay, this is another finished copy of something that we've already seen. Great. Fantastic. Okay, so this is by Scott Fulford, and it's called The Pandemic Paradox: How the COVID Crisis Made Americans More Financially Secure. And this comes out in late May. In March 2020, economic and social life across the United States came to an abrupt halt as the country tried to slow the spread of COVID-19. The worst economic contraction since the Great Depression, 22 million people lost their jobs between mid-March and mid-April of 2020. And yet somehow the finances of most Americans improved during the pandemic. Savings went up, debts went down, and fewer people had trouble paying their bills. In The Pandemic Paradox, economist Scott Fulford explains this seeming contradiction, describing how the pandemic reshaped the American economy. As Americans grappled with remote work, essential work, and closed schools, 3 massive pandemic relief bills, starting with the CARES Act on March 27, 2020, managed to protect many of America's most vulnerable. The author draws from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's Making Ends Meet surveys, which he helped design, to interweave macroeconomic trends in spending, saving, and debt with stories of individual American economic lives during the pandemic. We meet Winona, who quit her job to take care of her children, Marvin, who retired early and worried that his savings wouldn't last, Lisa, whose expenses went up after her grown kids and their dog moved back home, and many others. I always distrust that kind of anecdotal storytelling on a subject like this. I always distrust it. What the statistics and the stories show, the author argues, is that a better, fairer, more productive economy is still possible. Okay. That is. Okay. So what the statistics and stories show, the author argues, is that Gandalf was the only one of the Astari who actually fulfilled the mission of the Valar. Might as well be saying that. The success of pandemic relief policy proves that Americans' economic fragility is not an unsolvable problem, but we have to choose to solve it. Okay. All right. Well, I might send the finished copy to David Murphy, but it sounds like just on a simple factual level, I'm going to disagree with this author more often than I agree with him. Do we want to know who he is? Senior economist at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife and 2 young children. Okay, well, I don't know what your experience or reading about the pandemic has told you about what it did to the American economy or what the American economy did to it. But I doubt very much that the people who we have heard named in these anecdotes are better off financially now than they were before. And if this book is going to be full of stories and the ultimate impact of all the stories is that all these people are worse off, then whither goes the hypothesis that the people are better off, that the economy is better? I'm sure the Fortune 500 companies are better from shark-like profiteering in time of plague. Landlords are certainly better, but ordinary people, I don't know many ordinary people stories. Haven't read many ordinary people stories that came out rosier at the end of the pandemic than before. Mostly read stories of people who lost their jobs. And the bailouts, good Lord, the bailouts are a joke. The wealthiest country in the world gave 3 bailouts, and they were extremely miserly. All 3 of them were extremely miserly. Instead of, in late March and early April of 2020, when it was obvious that the government was going to shut the economy down, the government should also have said, well, every adult gets a check until this is done. Every month. You get a check every month until this is done. And maybe we liquidate a couple of missile systems to pay for it. Instead, that didn't happen. I don't know. Maybe this is hindsight. We shall see. I imagine this has lots and lots. Oh, my God. Huge amounts of documentation. Okay, well, I think these are both May books. I don't think anything on here is immediate read for me. I'm pretty sure that The Pandemic Paradox is a May release. Right, we said so. And this thing, An Army of Fire, didn't come with a pub sheet, but I'm pretty sure it's a May release as well. Then we have Cassandras Servant. Really looking forward to this, but there is a bar in place. I want to read Kushil's Dart again before I read this book. And then Here Goes Nothing by Steve Toltz, about a wacky afterlife story. Every publishing season has 2 or 3 of those. So great. A mail haul. That was a lot of fun. So I'm going to wrap this up while I'm ahead of the game. And I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.